Welcome to episode 368 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Meyers, screenwriter and blogger with sellingyourScreenplay.com. Today I'm interviewing writer Bob McCullough. He has written and even created a number of television shows, so we dig into all of that, how he got his start in his career and progressed through it. And he now runs the Wiki Screenplay Contest, which is a monthly screenwriting competition. We talk through some of his career highlights, how he broke into the business and what he is up to now. So stay tuned for that interview. SYS's six-figure screenplay contest is open for submissions. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/contest. The early bird deadline runs through March 31st. After that, it does go up by $10. So if your script is ready, definitely submit early. This year, we have a short film script category, 30 pages or less. So if you have a low-budget short script, by all means, submit that as well. I've got a number of industry judges / producers who are looking for short scripts. So hopefully we can find a home for some of those. The idea for this contest was simple: find the best low-budget scripts and present them to the industry. We're looking for the best low-budget screenplays. I'm defining low budget as less than $1 million US, in other words, 6 figures or less. For shorts, I would say 4 figures or less, so well less than $10,000 to produce the short. Every submission will be read by at least 2 professional readers who will do a short assessment, which you can actually purchase if you'd like to see what they thought. I've lined up about 50 industry judges to read the scripts that move into the later rounds. We're giving away thousands in cash and prizes to the winners. Once again, if this sounds like something you'd like to learn more about or perhaps enter, just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/contest. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or liking or sharing it on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread word about the podcast, so they're very much appreciated. Any websites or links that I mention in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcast. And then just look for episode number 368. If you want my free guide, How to Sell a Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks, along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I teach the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide. I'll teach you how to write a professional logline and query letter and how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. It really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Again, just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. So now let's get into the main segment. Today I am interviewing screenwriter Bob McCullough. Here is the interview. Welcome, Bob, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show with me today.
Ashley, I feel flattered to be invited.
Well, thank you for coming on. So to start out, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up and how did you get interested in the entertainment business?
Oh, gosh. I was a fairly interesting background, I think. Born and raised in the Los Angeles area. Went to a very unique high school, Beverly Hills High School, where a large number of my classmates were the children of studio network executives, movie stars, things like that. So I grew up in kind of a golden environment, if you will. But it led me to the point where, as an adult, I'm really not impressed by celebrities very much because I grew up with a lot of them. And then I began to. I went to USC thinking I'd become a dentist, and I had a terrible experience with organic chemistry. And at that time, the Vietnam War was raging, and you had to keep your GPA up to avoid the draft. So I started taking, quote, the easy classes like Shakespeare and poetry and English composition, and I found that I was a pretty good writer. I just had a natural instinct for it. And at USC, I also took some film classes. This is long before they had the major reputation they have now. And I discovered that editing was very much like writing. And while I was in college, I began to, as kind of part-time work, made myself into a semi-professional quiz show contestant. And at that time, quiz shows were the big thing on TV, daytime television. And I was on a whole bunch of quiz shows. And one day I was on the dating game, and I'm sitting on the soundstage, and kind of an exciting environment, lots of cameras and technology and people, and Jim Lang, the host of the show. It's all very show busy. And I start asking questions because I realize I'm never going to be a dentist. And I say, so I'm pointing to people on the set. What does that guy do? Oh, he's the cameraman. what kind of money does a cameraman make? Well, he makes around 600 a week. Whoa. In those days, that was a lot of money. And I kind of worked my way through the crew asking all these questions. And I finally point to the guy sitting in a chair across the set, kind of in the shadows, wearing a cashmere V-neck sweater, jeans, and tennis shoes. And I said, well, what does that guy do? He's not doing anything. Well, that's the producer. I said, really? What's he make? About 60,000 a week. I said, that's what I need to be, and kind of started directing myself in that vein. I went to graduate school at University of Texas in film and television, and while there, wrote my thesis, which was published actually, called Screenplay Theory and Practice. And it was basically a research piece based on all the existing material that was out there about screenwriting. Then upon returning to Los Angeles, while I was at grad school, I'd been invited to a very highfalutin seminar up at Stanford, where I met all the studio network executives, president of NBC, people like that, and I made sure to collect phone numbers. When I came back to LA after school, I started making some calls, and I wound up at NBC working as a page, as an usher, basically ushering old ladies into Let's Make a Deal. It was really terrible.
Back on the game shows, yeah.
Exactly.
You weren't making the 60,000 a week yet.
No. I was making 125 a week, and I'm wearing a coat and tie, standing in the 104-degree temperatures of Burbank all summer. At some point in time, I discovered there was a guy at Paramount Studios who would hire one of the pages, one page per year out of a staff of 20, as a kind of a gopher on the Paramount lot. And I said, that sounds like a fun job. I found out who the guy was. And 6 months before the hiring period began, I made myself really obnoxious. And I kind of broke down the studio gates. I kind of faked my way in. I had an envelope with this guy's name on it. I pulled up to the studio gates. I said, I have a delivery here for Mr. Crane. And they pointed me to where his office was. And
Brilliant.
I walked into this guy's office, and I sat down, and I waited for him to walk by. And I sat there for probably 6 hours before he even looked at me. And he finally said, who are you and what are you doing here? And I said, well, I'm here for the job. He said, well, the job's not for 6 more months. Come back then. I said, well, can I just have 5 minutes? Long story short, I talked my way into the job. He called me the next day, and I had the gig on Mission Impossible and Mannix, which were big hit series at the time. And I discovered the world of movie making from the real inside. This was no longer academics. This was show up at 5 o'clock in the morning and be prepared to work until 9 o'clock at night. It was hardcore film school on a professional basis. Again, I was making like $85 a week, but it was a great education. And while there, I also saw that writers had the best lifestyle. They were coming in at 10, they're leaving at 5, they're going to lunch, thinking writing looks like a pretty darn good gig, and I'm pretty good at it. So I began writing some scripts. Couldn't get anybody to read anything for about a year and a half. And finally, one of the producers on Mission Impossible, a man by the name of Bruce Lansbury, whom I will always think of, he read my script and gave me extensive notes on it. And that began to introduce me to the rewriting process. Long story short, I went through a series of jobs in the production department, learned a lot about how to make a movie, how to make a TV show. And while I was at Universal, I sold my very first script to $6 Million Man. And from that point, things just kind of evolved.
Gotcha. So just a kind of a philosophical question. What is it that you think attracted you to the entertainment industry? I mean, obviously you grew up in LA, so you were around it, but especially hearing you talk about, okay, this guy was making $60,000 a week. I mean, some of it was financial, and so some of it was not necessarily the creative lifestyle that was attracting you to it. And why not go? I think I read in your bio that you were a lawyer at one point, or was there some other things that you considered, and what sort of pushed you back towards it?
Absolutely. I realized early on that it was a kind of a flaky industry, no guarantees whatsoever. I had a master's degree, and that didn't guarantee me employment for sure. So I began to do things like I got a real estate license, and then that was kind of an easy thing to do. I said, well, how hard can law school be? So I got into law school, went 4 years at nights, got my law degree, and just as I was studying for the bars when I sold my first script at Universal, and that script paid more money than most lawyers make in a year. So I said, oh, wait a second, this is a good option if I can maintain this. So I worked very, very hard. I mean, I would come home at night after working a 14-hour-a-day job, and I would write until 2 o'clock in the morning because I knew that was my ticket in, that in television, writers have all the power. It's not the director in television. It's the director in feature films, but in the TV world, writers become producers, and they become owners, and it's just a better gig, frankly. It's also, I got very spoiled. I wrote my first script, and they actually shot it. You write your first screenplay, it may never get made. The odds are it will never get made. You need to write 24 screenplays before one gets bought, produced, developed, and shot. In television, I got very spoiled. I've done over, I think, almost 300 shows, and everything I ever wrote got shot, which that turns into kind of like, not an ego trip, but if you think about it this way, more people have seen one episode of my BJ and the Bear episodes than they've ever seen of anything by Shakespeare. That's crazy, but it's true. It's just in sheer numbers of people. So you can have an influence, and you can have a lot of creative fulfillment in television. That was my experience, at least. And it kind of drove me to become very, very prolific. I worked my butt off, but it was great fun, frankly. And I realized at the time I was in a privileged position, and I didn't want to let go of it until, I aged out, basically. But I was probably, when I did retire, I was probably the oldest working television writer producer of my generation.
I got you. Now, you made a comment just earlier. You got onto the Paramount lot. You came up with this plan to have this envelope and get on there, and you said you were as obnoxious as possible. You also made the point said you were on Mission Impossible, and you got this spec script to one of the producers. And this is always, I think, this is always something I think people do wrong, is how do you actually manage those situations where you are aggressive and a advocate for yourself, but you're not actually obnoxious and annoying? Like, where is that balance? And especially if you're the PA on Mission Impossible, I'm sure they don't want every PA, throwing them a spec script. They want you to get the coffee in this. So how do you sort of navigate those relationships?
Well, you'd be the very best go get coffee guy they've ever seen, right? And you show up an hour early before everybody else, and you stay until everybody else goes home. And if they're having a night shoot, you're there on the set. You devote yourself to being around. And when you're around, you make relationships and friendships evolve, and they come to understand a little bit about what you're really after. And I didn't walk around saying, hey, I'm going to be a TV writer. I said, this is really interesting. Can you tell me how you do these things? And people are always willing to share knowledge, particularly when you're younger. And when I say obnoxious, I wasn't obnoxious. The real word is persistent. I made it apparent that I wasn't going anywhere, and that I was preparing myself for better things. While doing that, whatever job they gave me, and I was a location manager for 5 or 6 years, I was the best location manager in town, and people wanted to work with me. And I got to read every script in town, and I worked with every major television director in town. So part of it is, I think you also have to have an understanding and awareness, a little bit of an emotional intelligence with people. You don't want to be in the way, but you want to be there and ready to help. And having that kind of a persona develops trust, and it's really about trust. And establishing those relationships is key. And I think that's what a lot of people forget. There are a lot of fabulous writers out there, but they don't have any relationships. They haven't done the networking. They haven't realized they're going to have to take some horrible job, go get the producer's car washed every day, pick his girlfriend up at the airport, get the sheets on his bed changed, whatever it is. But you want to be around. You want to be a trusted kind of compadre to people. And then they realize, well, if he writes a script, it's got to be good. He knows what's going on, right? He knows what we want. So that's kind of how I worked it. The episode at Paramount was very different because I was very young. I was 23, fresh-faced guy, show up at the studio gates. Those are the days before, crime on the streets wasn't so rampant, and you could get into the studio if you had a delivery. Today, they're going to screen you up one side and down the other, and you're not going to be able to get past the gates. But there are other ways to do it. Digital communications has opened up the world of contact with people. I mean, my wife Suzanne and I have our own podcast called Where Hollywood Hides, and we get to some major celebrities and people in the industry simply by reaching out and not being too obnoxious, but saying, hey, here's something you can do, and we're here for you. That's all. So it's a question of establishing trust with people, I think, is really the
Yeah.
key.
Yeah, I agree. So it sounds like you did a lot of like physical production. You were a location manager, a PA. And I'm curious, like I did extra work when I first rolled into LA, and I thought that was a good, quick, easy way to get on set and actually see a set. I'm from the East Coast. I'd never even really been on a set. But what do you recommend for people as a first job? These production jobs, exactly what you're saying, they're grueling hours. And I found when I got to LA, I had some of these production jobs, but I never felt like writing. They were so grueling. First off, I wasn't the best coffee maker, and that was maybe one problem. But the other problem was I would work 12, 14 hours, and I didn't feel like going home and writing spec scripts, And so I wasn't able to find that balance. But what do you recommend for people that are young, they're out of college, they're going to get that entry level job? What do you think it is? Could it be something that's outside of the entertainment industry? Could it be, I always felt like I like rethinking my own journey. I always thought maybe going into distribution, like I should have found like a PA job for a distribution company, because I feel like that's where you could learn a lot about why movies are getting made and why they're actually making money. And that could really enhance you as things. But I totally get the production thing too. Understanding production will definitely help you as a writer. But what is your recommendation now after your career?
Well, I'm not sure distribution. I mean, I'm still trying to figure out what distribution is. And it's really that pulls you away from the set. It pulls you away from the talent. You're kind of the ultimate end of a production, if you will. I believe that any job that pays is a good job. I never worked for free, although I had a lot of opportunity to work on major motion pictures as a free PA, as an intern. And I just valued myself to the point where if I'm an intern and you want me around, you got to pay me, something, a minimum wage. You got to buy my gas, for God's sake. So I passed a lot of big time movie jobs because I wouldn't work for free. My recommendation would be, I don't care what the job is. If you can get close to directors, producers, writers, actors, that's the job you want. A job in an office where you never go to the set, where you never have contact with the creative forces of a show or a production, that to me is kind of an executive track. I thought I might go that way when I got my law degree, because that was kind of a prerequisite in my mind, at least. I wanted to be a network vice president or something. Well, thank God I didn't do that. And I got, I guess, lucky, but I was prepared. Remember, I'd been writing scripts. Nobody was reading. And I finally wrote one that I got a producer to read. And he said, this is pretty good. What do you want? And I said, well, I want into the Writers Guild, and I want to get paid for this, and I want you to shoot it. He said, oh, okay, we can do that. And it was as simple as that. But I had written, I don't know, 24 movie scripts and TV scripts and pilot ideas and everything else. Because after my 14-hour day, I understood I was tired, but there was only one way out of the trap of just having a job, and that was to be hyper productive, to exceed expectations, and to always appear to be ready to contribute. So that's kind of my take on that. Your track, thinking about getting into distribution, that really pulls you away from the creative end. And I was just bound and determined not to wear a necktie. I was kind of a rebel in that way. I just knew I didn't want to put on a suit and tie every day. Call it arrogance, call it, I had a lot of other options. I could have become a cop, any number of things, right? Mm-hmm. And I kind of wanted it on my own terms, and it worked out pretty well. I don't think I've worn a necktie except for funerals twice mm-hmm. in the last 30 years,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I got you on that.
I'm just a California guy and much more of a beach personality than an office personality mm-hmm. that way.
Yeah. Okay, so what was this first spec that you sold? Did you say it was a Mission Impossible? You were a PA on Mission Impossible and you sold a Mission Impossible spec?
Well, I had been a PA on Mission Impossible for a long time. I wrote the script. I got great notes from Bruce Lansbury. And then I got hired at Universal as a location manager. While at Universal, I'm doing a $6 Million Man and Bionic Woman. I became very familiar with those two shows and exactly what the structure of those those hours was. And I had, because I was a location manager, I'm dealing with the writers I'm taking them to locations so they can write a scene to a location, as well as directors. And I was hanging out on the set a lot, talking to Lee Majors and Lindsay Wagner and kind of getting their vibe on what their character was about. My trick was I took, I don't know, between 4 and 6 directors out one day in a big minivan, scouting locations to determine what they could shoot. While doing that, I'm taking them to all my secret places throughout LA County, and I realized what's going to happen. They're going to talk to writers, and the writers are going to write treatments, and the treatments are going to be pitched to the producer. So I just went home that night, and I wrote 17 quick pitches, 1 pages, 2 paragraphs. Here's the story. Here's what Steve Austin does in this episode, and here's what Jamie Summers does in this episode. And the next morning, I was taking more guys out on location scouts. I dropped all 17 pages on the producer's desk at about 6:30 in the morning before he came in. And when I came back that afternoon at 5 o'clock, the producer called me and he said, "What's this about? Why are you leaving this stuff on my desk?" I said, "Because I want to write one." He said, "Okay, which one of these do you want to write?" And I picked one out of the pile. It was this, in this corner, Jamie Summers. She becomes a female wrestler. He said, "Okay, that sounds like fun. Let's see if you can write it." Well, I came back literally 2 days later with the script. I said, "Here's my shot at it." And next thing I know, it was in production. So that was kind of my tactic. I leveraged what I knew and what I knew the pace of production was. And in television, they're always late with scripts. Nobody can deliver a script on time for some incredible reason. So they're always behind the gun. And I just proved that I was the guy that could deliver the script early. That I was going to go home and I'm not going to sleep. I'm going to deliver the script tomorrow morning. So I kind of developed a reputation as that kind of a writer, which led me to become a showrunner, and all kinds of wonderful opportunities followed.
Gotcha. So then once you had that produced script, were you then able to get an agent, and did that start to get you more stuff, or did you continue to beat the bush with your own networking and your own contacts?
I did all of it. You can't just do one thing. I did all of it. I continued to beat the bush. I was talking to other people on other shows. Meanwhile, I wrote 100 letters to agents throughout Hollywood. At that time, you could get a mailing list from the Writers Guild. I think you probably still can. And I sent out 100 letters. I said, "Hey, I just have a script deal at Universal, blah, 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 blah. And that's in production. And I've got a great movie idea, and I've got a spec script I'd love you to see." Out of the 100, and this is the truth, 3 people responded. That's a pretty low percentage.
It's something, man. You're in there.
But this is like old school. I'm typing these letters. This is not word processing, and I'm putting a stamp on an envelope. I did 100 envelopes, 100 stamps. 3 people responded. One of the agents was very flattering and all excited about me, and I went with that agent. It was the worst possible agent I could have gone with, but what did I know, right? So I was with that agent who got me no work for a good year. Meanwhile, I'm selling myself on the lot, trying to write other scripts and other material. And then I got turned on to a guy who was the classic Hollywood agent, incredibly bright, had my kind of energy, a guy named Barry Perlman, who's still in the business. And Barry Perlman took me to Universal and sold me as a staff writer on BJ and the Bear. The interesting thing is, and I discussed this in our podcast, when I returned to the lot as a writer on staff, nobody recognized me from having been in production. It was weird. It was like you're once you're above the line, the people below the line suddenly don't even know who you are. They hold you in some kind of reverence, which is insane. And so that's how that happened. And once I was on BG, and it was a hit show, and I did a whole bunch of stuff for Glenn Larson and Universal, and just things kind of propelled. Your career takes on a life of its own. You cannot pick the path. The path picks you. The trick is, in my opinion, be high energy, be available, be willing to talk to anybody, and don't ever turn anything down.
Yeah, sound advice for sure. So let's talk about one of the shows you were the creators on with Soldier of Fortune. That was in the late 90s. And I'm just curious, just to kind of use it as a template for creating a show and being a showrunner. How did that project come about? I mean, obviously you had been in the business for years. You had numerous credits, but just talk us through that. And eventually I'm going to kind of get to, how other people can potentially be showrunners or create their own shows. But how did this come about for you?
Well, first of all, I'm very impressed by the research you've obviously done. I've forgotten about Soldier of Fortune, frankly.
Is that right? Yeah, Dennis Rodman, I noticed, was in it.
Oh yeah. That was an experience. I actually went to a Bulls game with him. It was like a rock concert. It was fabulous.
I'm sure.
Long story short, so I had some credits. I had partnered with another writer at that time because I was getting a little bit older. So a guy who had been writing since he was actually the youngest member of the Writers Guild back in the 80s. He and I had stayed in contact and touch. His dad had been very helpful in my career over the years. And he and I were approached by Jerry Bruckheimer, who had the rights to Soldier of Fortune, which was a magazine at the time. And they had no idea what the show was. But they had a script written by a guy named Dan Gordon, I think. And it didn't make a lot of sense. It hadn't been very well researched. It was basically a bang, bang, shoot 'em up kind of a thing. My partner and I were much more interested in doing something serious that really kind of displayed the life and the sacrifices that people who are mercenary soldiers have to give in order to accomplish their tasks. So we were given the pilot script and we basically read it, set it aside, came up with our own cast of characters. And in many ways, it's the Dirty Dozen, it's the professionals, it's pulling together a team, it's the Magnificent Seven. We took that formula, which worked so well, and we brought together a coherent team of characters and just began working on their biographies. Each character had his own backstory, which you never saw, but we had to write it for ourselves. And then we wrote the Bible. And the Bible was, half the size of a phone book, but detailed every single episode for the first season and every single story arc. And we took a lot of stuff right out of the headlines. We did a story about the world's best sniper. At that time, his name was Carlos Hathcock, and he had made a kill from like a mile and a half away, which was remarkable at that time. So it was very much like American Sniper, but it was a TV episode, very well produced. Jerry Bruckheimer is not a guy to come up short in terms of production. And most interestingly, he was very much interested in developing directors for his feature film slate. So we were introduced to a series of commercial directors, guys who shot Ford truck commercials, who had great visual senses. And we basically taught them how to direct for television on a television schedule and deal with actors and things like that. That was a lot of fun, frankly. Mm-hmm. That show was terrific. Met some terrific actors. Still have some good relationships with those folks.
And I'm curious, and I just like to give people sort of a sense of the scope. So you're in this position. Bruckheimer brings this project to you. You write the spec, you write the show Bible and stuff, and then the show goes into production. Just again, in terms of the scope, how many of these types of projects did you work on and you got right up to that finish line, but then they didn't actually make it into production for whatever reason? And because it always feels like we spend so much time in this business, on the successes, but I think sometimes it's lost that in order to get to that success, there's quite a bit of, and I hate to call them failures, but there's quite a bit of things that there's quite a few things that don't make it through to the finish line, but they're part of that learning curve, and they're just part of the process of getting a number of, fires,
Sure.
irons in the fire.
Sure. Well, let's call them what they are. They are failures, okay? And if you're not willing to fail, you shouldn't be in the game because you're going to fail 80% of the time. I've been very, very fortunate only to have failed a few times, but man, they were massive failures. Two come to mind. One was a pilot I sold to ABC called Tag Team, starring Jesse the Body Ventura before he became governor, and a really great wrestler, wonderful guy, Rowdy Roddy Piper. And I had been at the time my son was 3 or 4 years old, and we went to see a WWF event at the sports arena, and he was like his eyes were just like saucers. And we came home and he said, "Dad, what if wrestlers were cops?" And I said, "That's a good idea." The next day I'm at ABC because I had some entree through my agents. And I said, "Here's the pitch. 2 wrestlers become cops." And that was the total pitch. I had nothing on writing, nothing on paper. And they said, "Great, when can you have that?" We developed it. We did some casting. We found Roddy Piper and Jesse Ventura. We did some screen tests with them. It was a little hard to convince the network to go with real wrestlers because they wanted actors. We interviewed every actor over 6 feet tall. We interviewed him, and none of them, frankly, looked like wrestlers or acted like them. But these 2 guys were fabulous. So I write the pilot script. We shoot the pilot. For its time, it was very funny. It was a lot of action in it. It's on YouTube. I'm sure you can see the pilot, the tag team pilot. And it was kind of a standard story about protecting an eyewitness. The network says, "Wow, we like the pilot. We're going to order 22 episodes." I'm thinking I'm cashing a check. 22 episodes. I'm the creator, executive producer. This is going to be fabulous. In the interim, so we get the 22 scripts going. I hire a whole bunch of writers. They write terrific stuff. I do all the rewriting. The scripts are basically in a big package. Everything is ready to go. At that time, in the interim, you have to keep working. You have to pay your rent, right? I'd taken another job on a show called The New Zorro, and I was in Spain shooting that. And I get a phone call from my agents, and I'm thinking they're going to congratulate me. The show just started shooting today, the tag team series. And once that series starts to shoot, there's a whole series of payments that kind of fall into place because you get all these bonuses. And the guy calls me in Spain. He says, I have news for you about tag team. I'm thinking, wonderful. The news is they canceled the show. They canceled the show 6 hours before the first crew call.
Oh my gosh.
They had dressing room trucks, wardrobe trucks full of wardrobe. They had the catering guy on his way to the location. The actors are literally in makeup. And there was a phone conversation between Bob Iger, who was the head of ABC at the time, and a guy named Jeffrey Katzenberg, whom I'm sure you've heard of. He was the television development executive at Disney at the time, and it was a Disney show. And those 2 guys apparently didn't get along, and there was a big beef about budget, and they hung up the phone on each other, and that was the end of the show. And I was devastated, obviously, from a creative standpoint, because I had all these writers working, and these guys are all looking to get their production bonuses and things like that. But there were 200 other people ready to go to work that morning, and suddenly they're all fired. I thought that was the cruelest thing that ever happened. It was my biggest failure. I was not even involved in the failure. It was between 2 executives. But from a creative standpoint, my other quote big failure was I was working for Aaron Spelling Productions, and Aaron came to me with a script that he couldn't really shoot. It wasn't a very good script. It was called Dark Mansions, and it was kind of it was nighttime soap opera, haunted house kind of a thing. Big stars: Michael York, Linda Pearl, Paul Shinar, Olivia de Havilland. I mean, big stars were in this thing. That was Aaron Spelling's way of casting. And we shot the show. Jerry London was the director, fabulous director, good friend. And the show was terrific. It was a great 2-hour movie. And we did an audience test screening at a place called ASI on Sunset Boulevard, where they bring in audiences who pay nothing to get in. And they hook them up to little finger monitors and dials and things like that. And they basically, it's a survey. Real-time survey. As you're watching the movie, tell us how you feel about these things. Well, as soon as the titles came on, the score was so over the top, the audience started to laugh. And that was the end of that show. I mean, you're doing a spooky drama, ghost story, and people are laughing. That's not good. So Aaron Spelling actually left the screening room 5 minutes later. He didn't want to be around to see what happened. So I was left holding the bag, and the reviews on it in Daily Variety and Hollywood Reporter were just terrible, enough to sink anybody's career. I was lucky to survive that. But so things like, but again, a lot of these things are out of your control. So you could write the best script possible. You could write the Green Book as a spec script, which is a fabulous script, and it's miscast, or the release date is screwed up, or COVID-19 happens, the movie never gets released. That's a failure.
Mm-hmm.
Your name goes nowhere. Your career is at a standstill. So there are lots of basically unpredictable, imponderable, unpreventable things that are going to happen. Stuff happens completely out of your control. You have to be willing to roll with that stuff. You have to realize it's like any relationship. You think you're in control, you're not really in control. The other people are. So there's a great deal of resiliency that's required, I believe. And you have to kind of enjoy the process of coming up with material and testing it, seeing what people, how they react, how things work, and sometimes you think it's great and you let somebody read your script and they'll say, yeah, it's great, except I don't believe any of it. Oh, gee, I forgot that part, right? I forgot the credibility part. But so that kind of happens, which leads me to one of the things I'm doing now. About 4 or 5 years ago, a partner and I got together. He was sending out his material to screenplay contests, and I didn't even know what a screenplay contest was. And he's telling me that, well, you send in $100 and people read your script and they give you notes on it. And I said, well, that's wonderful. Why is that happening? Was my first question. And secondly, who are these people that are reading your script? And he didn't know. We did a little bit of research. Turns out that the people reading the scripts on most screenplay contests are not professionals. They have no credits, but they took a couple of classes in writing, or they've interned at a studio or something. And the other factor is that studios were really getting rid of their development departments because it's expensive to have a development staff. You got to pay health and welfare, you got to buy them lunch, office space, all that stuff. So they've kind of what's the word, without really meaning to, they've kind of let that whole development business evaporate from a studio standpoint, and they now depend on screenplay contests to vet their material. They're one of the gatekeepers now. So I was looking at the contest my buddy had entered, and I realized these people, none of them have any real credits. Why would you let them read your script to begin with? So we started our own. And we did that by recruiting people who have massive credits in feature and television film. And we put together a roster of judges, and it's the Los Angeles International Screenplay Awards. We've now seen 15,000 scripts, and we've judged them very carefully. Everything gets multiple reads. And while doing that, a lot of writers get very impatient. Well, why is it taking 3 weeks for you to read my script? Why is it? And the first contest we ran was a year long. Why is it taking a year for me to find out if my script's any good? I realized the real problem there. My wife was talking to me about it, Suzanne, and she said, if I'm a writer, I want to know, like, within a month if my script's any good. So Suzanne got together with me, and she said, what if we did a monthly screenplay contest, and it's really fast, and a writer who submits a script anytime during the month will get responses within that month. So she came up with the Wiki Screenplay Contest, which I think you see behind me.
Yep.
We call it the world's fastest screenplay contest. And we just wrapped up the November contest, and we had entries on November 30th. And those people are going to get responses within 5 days, because we have 20 really professional, seasoned, highly educated people. We don't call them readers. They aren't just readers. They're analysts. And they look at 10 very significant categories that goes into any successful screenplay, and we judge material completely independently of one another, and we share opinions, and then we resolve with a very transparent test score, competition score, which most screenplay contests will never reveal. We reveal every score, every comment completely to every writer, and we're also the lowest priced contest out there. And even more uniquely, we don't even require you to write a complete screenplay, because a lot of people start a script and then they have trouble finishing it, or they get stuck halfway through, or they're unmotivated, right? I mean, it's great to start something. The hard part's Act 3, believe me, every time.
Yeah.
So the unique selling proposition of the Wiki Screenplay Contest is you only need 10 pages, because the first 10 pages are really what it's all about. When you hand a script to a director or an actor or a producer and you say, please read my material, if the first 10 pages don't hook them, they're never going to go to page 11. I can tell you that as one who's been handed a lot of scripts. If the script sucks by page 5, I don't read to page 6. But if it's great by page 10, I finished reading that script. And that's a very unique script. So we offer writers the opportunity to write just 10 pages or a full script, and we will give them complete analysis, complete scoring transparency. And we've been able to help a lot of people fashion and hone their material so that it's really ready for prime time. And that's the really great satisfaction for us is the testimonials that are completely unsolicited we get from writers thanking us for showing them where they turned left when they should have turned right. And it always shows up in the first 10 pages, frankly. So that's been that's been a lot of fun. We've met some terrific writers, and I think our last winner, the October contest winner, was in Tahiti. The prior month we had an Australian writer. We have writers from all over the world. So it's not just Hollywood or LA, and the concept that you must be in LA to make it happen. Well, not as a writer. To make a career happen, I think you do need to be in LA. You've got to be ready to meet people. You have to kind of get out and about. You have to get that job, or you have to be, or you have to be a self-starter like Ashley Scott Meyers is. You've got to create something for yourself, because nobody's going to create it for you. Frankly, there's nobody sitting at Schwab's soda fountain anymore, waiting to be discovered, because you will collect dust. Believe me.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a good segue into my final question. How can people find out and kind of follow with what you're doing? What is and I'll round all this up for the show notes, but what is your URL for your Wiki Screenplay Contest and international Los Angeles International Screenplay Contest?
Well, the wiki is wikiscreenplaycontest.com.
Perfect.
And the Los Angeles International Screenplay Awards is a little bit longer. I think it's lascreenplaycontest.com.
Perfect. And are you on Twitter or anything, like you want to share your Twitter handle, Facebook, blog, anything like that?
Everything is at Hollywood Hides for Twitter, because we also have Where Hollywood Hides, the podcast series where we interview people in the industry, and really the drive for that is to give people career guidance. How do I break in? How do I get that production job? How do I become a TV director? How do I become an actor who really works? Things like that. So Where Hollywood Hides really focuses on that. Social media, we have found, is kind of a time suck. It's very expensive from a time standpoint. We're much more interested in reading people's scripts for the 2 screenplay contests than we are in communicating with them on social media. But we do have a Facebook page. We do have Instagram, things like that. Frankly, I don't really like to deal with it very much because it's a big distraction, Yeah, I mean, there's work to be done, and it's great to make contact, great to reach out, but anybody can reach me at info@wikiscreenplaycontest.com or info@lascreenplayawards.com. I'm happy to respond via email to anybody. I do a lot of email communication with all of our writers. Lots of people just have questions about the contests. Happy to answer them, deal with them. And we do a lot of follow-up with writers too, who have a second draft. They've worked on a script after they've seen our notes, and they want us to take a look at it, and we're happy to do that, because it's really about helping the writer achieve what they're after. And I don't think writers are necessarily after fame, but they want to be recognized, and the best way to be recognized is to get paid for what you're doing. And that's what I'm about. I'm about getting writers to the point where they're going to get paid for their work.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Bob, I really appreciate you coming on and talking with me today. This has been great. Lots of great information, and we'll definitely circle back in a couple months if you want to come back on and talk about as the contests progress.
Yeah, we're having a lot of fun with it. We really are. All right, Ashley, thanks very much.
I just want to talk quickly about SYS Select. It's a service for screenwriters to help them sell their screenplays and get writing assignments. The first part of the service is the SYS Select Screenplay Database. Screenwriters upload their screenplays along with a logline, synopsis, and other pertinent information like budget and genre, and then producers search for and hopefully find screenplays they want to produce. Dozens of producers are in the system looking for screenplays right now. There have been a number of success stories come out of the service. You can find out about all the SYS Select successes by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/success. Also on SYS podcast, episode 222. I talk with Steve Deering, who was the first official success story to come out of the SYS Select database. When you join SYS Select, you get access to the screenplay database along with all the other services that we're providing to SYS Select members. These services include the newsletter. This monthly newsletter goes out to a list of over 400 producers who are actively seeking writers and screenplays. Each SYS Select member can pitch one screenplay in this monthly newsletter. We also provide Screenwriting Leads. We have partnered with one of the premier paid Screenwriting Leads services, so I can syndicate their leads to SYS Select members. There are lots of great paid leads coming in each week from our partner. Recently, we've been getting 5 to 10 high-quality paid leads per week. These leads run the gamut. There's producers looking for a specific type of spec script to producers looking to hire a screenwriter to write up one of their ideas or properties. They're looking for shorts, features, TV, and web series pilots, all types of projects. If you sign up for SYS Select, you'll get these leads emailed directly to you several times per week. Also, you get access to the SYS Select forum, where we will help you with your logline and query letter and answer any screenwriting related questions that you might have. We also have a number of screenwriting classes that are recorded and available in the SYS Select forum. These are all the classes that I've done over the years, so you'll have access to those whenever you want once you join. The classes cover every part of writing your screenplay, from concept to outlining to the first act, second act, third act, as well as other topics like writing short films and pitching your projects in person. Once again, if this sounds like something you'd like to learn more about, please go to sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. Again, that is sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. On the next episode of the podcast, I'm going to be interviewing Susie Maloney. She is a book author who was able to leverage that success into a screenwriting career. She's from Canada, where she continues to live and work. She's very down to earth, offers a lot of great insight into the business of writing. So keep an eye out for that episode next week. That's our show. Thank you for listening.